We're still in Chapter 5. Now we're on Objective 5.4, and we're talking about evaluating the collectability of accounts receivable. So account receivable is credit that you give to your customers to buy your product. So there's some issues that come into play if you're selling on credit as opposed to cash. If it's cash, you get paid. If it's credit, sometimes you don't get paid. That's a big news flash. Some customers don't pay. All right, and a big part of business is really figuring out how to get paid. Some of you may have had experience if you worked for businesses. You've seen how hard sometimes they have to struggle to get paid after they provide a good or service. So we're talking about how do we account for that. The preferred method. So the preferred method, and in GAAP, there are preferred methods, there are required methods, there are permitted but not required methods. Allowance is preferred method. There is another method, but basically, if you do any credit sales, you're going to use the allowance method. So the allowance method is really the one that's used even for non-publicly traded companies. Okay. We're going to base our credit loss and our recognition, our credit loss of that expense, on an estimate. So you could just wait till the customer says, you know what, I'm not going to pay you, or they go bankrupt, or you have some really confirming evidence that they're not going to pay. But businesses do so much business on credit terms with trade credit that they have experience that tells them on average what to expect for a credit loss. So the minute that they book business on credit, they know they're going to lose some money due to credit losses. Okay? So since they can reliably estimate it, what will happen in the future, they're going to go ahead and recognize the expense with the event that created it. So if you sold it on credit, that's the event that created the credit loss. So you're going to try to match it in that time period. Okay? So, whoa. Sorry, that was my little touchpad thing here. Okay, so just for a real quick example, you sell $10 million of stuff to 2,000 customers. Somebody's not going to pay you in full, but you don't know who. If you knew who, you wouldn't give them credit. But we know on average, this company knows that customers on average 1% of every dollar doesn't pay. Okay? So to calculate bad debt expense, they take 1% times the 10 million, and that's 100,000. And if they did the 10 million this year, they'd recognize bad debt expense, also called provision expense, or the uncollectible. The book uses this uncollectible account expense. All the same thing. All right. Provision expense is used in the real world and used in banking. And we go into this account called the allowance. We credit the allowance. The allowance is a contra asset account. Okay, remember that. So it's a normal credit balance, so we're actually increasing that account. All right, and we're going to use it to offset the receivable. So the allowance goes with the accounts receivable. The two together tell you the net receivable. All right, this method that we just did with the percent of sales is appropriately named the percent of sales method. And some companies use this method. Okay, so there's the percent of sales method, and there's the aging of receivables. And both of these are under the allowance method. The allowance method just tells you that you're going to base your credit loss expense on an estimate. The percent of sales is a way to estimate the number, and the aging of receivables is a way to estimate the number. Okay? What the allowance method, so we already saw the percent of sales method does. What the aging method does is you'll be given the beginning trial balance, And the aging method will estimate this number, which is a balance, an ending balance. Estimate ending balance. And then you'll back into what the journal entry would have been. So this is your bad debt expense. So this is effectively, you're using the T account to figure out what you would have posted from the journal entry. And so the journal entry would have been, and you'd have to do it to put it into your system, bad debt expense, and then the allowance. 1,000, 1,000. Okay, so we get, this is the way we would get our supplies expense, if you remember that. And the next video, we're going to actually do a full-blown aging problem. Okay, but this is just to show you that percent of sales and aging are both allowance methods. And in point of fact, some companies will use both. As they go through the year, they'll use percent of sales, and then they'll true things up with the aging. Almost every company actually has an aging schedule. It's a widely used tool to manage credit.